the state of Texas, which is building clean energy faster than any place in America right now. Fossil fuel burning constitutes roughly 80% of the cause of climate change. 30 or 40 years from now, we'll run the planet on sun and wind just based on economics. You can either pay for this renewable energy technology once and then get free energy from the sun, or you can continue to pay forever to buy the next increment of fossil fuel. The thought of depending on Donald Trump's goodwill in order to make your energy supply work is terrifying. Pakistanis are not adopting solar power because they're trying to fight the climate crisis. They're doing it because electricity has been expensive. The Secretary of Commerce was in Davos yesterday telling the European heads of state to cut it out with the renewables and to burn coal instead. It's not as if we couldn't solve these things creatively, but under Trump, they're just using them as an excuse to try and build more gas-fired power. There's a lot of extra energy in this system now, and it's scary to watch. That's why I don't think there's any great outcome here. And an outcome where we've shaved some percentage of the eventual heat out by putting up a lot of solar panels and wind turbines.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Science Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Mohammed Ittefaq, a climate communication professor at James Madison. Today, we will be talking about renewable energy, the climate movement, and clean energy, and asking main fundamental central question: is this truly the direction the climate movement is fighting for? I'm really honored to be joined by one of the leading voices on clean energy and climate activism. Bill McKibben is one of the co-founder. He's the co-founder of Third Act, an organization that mobilizes people over 60 of years of age for action on climate and justice. He's also the author. A long time ago, he wrote a book, The End of Nature, and I'm going to ask him today as well how the person who wrote a book on the end of the nature comes to write a book on Here Comes the Sun. He has written more than 20 books and has received several awards in that honor, including Right Livelihood Award and the Gandhi Peace Prize. Bill, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to Science Talk.
Mohammed, what a pleasure to be with you, man.
Thank you. So let's start with this question. Why are you so excited about renewable energy revolution? I saw you talking on many of the podcasts, including Democracy Now! So what is the excitement and why are you so excited when many people are still not about climate?
Well, uh, the excitement's because we finally, I wrote The End of Nature almost 40 years ago. Um, and sadly, all the stuff that we talked about then has come true. The poles are now melting, the oceans are rising, the weather has gone weird. The jet stream and the Gulf Stream are flickering and faulting. We could not be in a worse place.
Mhm.
Um, but we finally have a tool with which to at least begin to mount some defense against climate change. Not to stop it, it is sadly too late for that, but maybe to start shaving tenths of a degree of how hot it eventually gets on this planet. And as you know, the best science indicates that every tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature moves about another 100 million people
Mhm.
out of a comfortable climate zone and into a perilous one. So, so very worth doing.
Mhm.
Um, this tool, cheap renewable energy, is brand new. It was only 4 or 5 years ago that we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to generate power from the sun and the wind than from setting stuff on fire, coal, oil, gas. And that's a huge moment. Once we crossed that line, progress at a rapid pace became possible, and we've begun to see it. Mostly, it must be said, in China, which has really embraced this vision of the future, but also in all sorts of other places, right next to China, in places like Pakistan, in places that are progressive by nature, like California, but also in places that aren't progressive by nature, like the state of Texas,
Mhm.
which is building clean energy faster than any place in America right now. So it's not that we're going to win the fight against global warming.
Mhm.
We're not. Uh, at best, we're going to try and fight it to as much of a draw as we can. Uh, and it's not that there's anything guaranteed about moving in the direction of clean energy. The Trump administration obviously is doing everything it possibly can to keep us from moving in that direction, but all the more reason to fight for it.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, as you said, it's just one step in the right direction to have more clean energy in abundance. So we move away from burning fossil fuel. What are some other things we need to do? If it's, as you said, it's too late, but what are some of the other things so we can reduce the risks of, global climate migration or flooding or heat waves?
I think this is by far the most important and doable thing because fossil fuel burning constitutes roughly 80% of the cause of climate change.
Mhm.
There's also work to be done around deforestation and agriculture.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad that there are people hard at work on that. The part that I've spent my life on is mostly this part around fossil fuel. And the problem always was that we lived in a world where the thing that was causing the destruction of the climate, fossil fuel, was also the thing that underpinned the economy.
Mhm.
So it was very difficult to make this transition. Now we live in a world where there's an easy alternative,
Mhm.
and the pace with which we adopt that alternative will determine how much trouble we get out of. Obviously, the people who understand this reality the best are those who work in the fossil fuel industry.
Mhm.
They're panicked at what's going on and are doing everything they can to stop it, mostly by gaming political systems with their money. Um, they know that they're now producing an inferior and expensive product compared to the electricity we can get from the wind and the sun. Um, so that's the that's the fight right now.
Yeah. So the it's easy, in terms of installation and in terms of alternative, but it's not easy still to convince or persuade largely big emitters and the companies and organizations and even countries to move into that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the pace with which it's happening is pretty remarkable.
Mhm.
90% or more of new electric generation around the world the last 2 years has come from sun and wind. And increasingly, we're seeing batteries, the sort of third part of that holy trinity, play a huge role in this work. Um, the problem is just persuading companies, countries to
Mhm.
go fast enough because we're up with such a time crunch with climate change. You know, by 30 or 40 years from now, not that I'll be alive to see it, but 30 or 40 years from now, we'll run the planet on sun and wind just based on economics. But if it takes us 30 or 40 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind will be a broken one.
Mhm.
So the job is to speed up this transition. The economics are there to allow it to happen. Now it's up to civil society and political institutions to really grasp the possibilities and to shake off the dead weight of the fossil fuel industry as best they can.
Is that like we built this modern industrialized civilization on fossil fuel, and many countries are too afraid to move away because they have built their economic system
They
around
have,
fossil fuel?
well, there's a lot of infrastructure that's there in place, and it's hard for anyone to abandon
Mhm.
existing infrastructure. And yes, infrastructure leads to interests. There are, lots of jobs that are tied to the coal plant or whatever it is. But there are also lots of jobs, more jobs tied to this transition.
Mhm.
And I think what's really starting to persuade one country after another are two things. One, the economic argument just gets clearer and clearer. You
Mhm.
can either pay for this renewable energy technology once and then get free energy from the sun, or you can continue to pay forever to buy the next increment of fossil fuel. The big study from Oxford a couple of years ago indicates that a rapid transition to renewables saves the world tens of trillions of dollars just because of decreased fuel cost. This is especially true for the 80% of the population of the planet that lives in countries that are net fossil fuel importers.
Mm.
So for them, it's just a constant drain on hard currency. And when we talk about countries getting in debt crisis and things, this is almost always a huge part,
Yeah,
often the main part of their difficulty. But
yeah.
the second reason that countries are headed this way fast right now, I think, has to do with emerging geopolitical reality. Do you really want to be dependent on Putin's
Mhm.
Russia or Trump's America for your supplies of energy
Yeah.
when they can cut it off at a whim? The thought of depending on Donald Trump's goodwill in order to make your energy supply work is terrifying because, you know, who knows what he's going to decide 5 minutes from now, you
Yeah.
know? He may just decide that for some reason he doesn't like Denmark, and then
Mhm.
they're in big trouble, you know?
Yeah.
So I think country after country is noticing that and deciding that all things considered, they'd really rather depend on the sun,
Mhm.
which has so far risen each morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the current administration, as you know, on the one hand, we see the solar expansion on places like China, Pakistan, or California, or many other places, including Texas. But on the other hand, we are witnessing. I think yesterday there was an article published in the Nature about $30 billion cuts in science funding, or even
Yeah,
shutting down key research centers in the
yeah.
U.S. Now, many developing or emerging markets, countries in the global south, they looked up to the US, that's the innovation, and they're going to drive the change, but they have not, like upscaled their lifestyle, right? Pakistan, for example, 5 years ago, like electricity would be gone for 18 hours, within 24 hours, and there's no fan running in 120-degree Fahrenheit in Lahore, and like hundreds of people die each year due to heat waves.
Yep.
On the other hand, in the first word, if we can use that phrase, they are like attacking the science from left and right, thinking that this is like the worst thing ever humans did. And what do you make of these two different words right now?
So let's talk about the American world first. Trump clearly and the administration are just doing favors for the fossil fuel industry.
Mhm.
Trump told Big Oil during the campaign, their executives, if you give me $1 billion for my campaign, then I'll give you anything you want. They gave him about $500 million. That was enough because the stuff they're doing is insane. They're shutting down operational wind farms off the
Mhm.
Atlantic seaboard. They're preventing the use of solar energy on federal lands. And as you point out, they're destroying the scientific basis of our understanding of the world around us. To me, it's equivalent. You've watched bank robbery movies.
Mhm.
Uh, the
Yes.
bank robbers, the first thing they do when they get to the bank before they rob it is they pull out a can of spray paint and cover the surveillance cameras so that
Yeah.
nobody can watch what they're doing.
Mhm.
Well, that's what we're doing. We're shutting down the satellites. We're even talking about shutting down the station at Mauna Loa
Mhm.
that's been producing the CO2 record since 1958. The single most important scientific instrument in human history. Um, I I think that those efforts are disgusting and just beyond stupid. I also think they come too late.
Mhm.
I think most people in most places now understand what's going on with the planet's climate. And, this will make it harder to track weather and prevent hurricane damage and whatever, but uh, it won't fool anyone into thinking that climate change isn't happening. Um, the story in places like Pakistan is so interesting. Yeah, Pakistan, I think, has been harder hit by climate change than any country on Earth.
Yes. Hmm.
The summertime temperatures are almost incomprehensible
Hmm.
now. And twice in 2010 and 2023, we've seen floods
Yes.
that are, I mean, the worst floods since Noah, you
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
um, uh, just flooding on a scale that's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah. 40% of the country was underwater in
Underwater, you know,
2022. Yeah.
just like a huge, just inland lake, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, there's plenty of other countries, especially in South Asia, that deal with the same kind of crises. But in Pakistan, seems to have just taken it on the chin
Hmm.
in lots of ways. um, which is why it is. I mean, I know that Pakistanis are not adopting solar power because they're trying to fight the climate crisis.
Hmm.
They're doing it because electricity has been expensive and
I mean, it
unreliable.
works, right? Whatever,
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's been a truly inspiring thing to watch over the last 24 months. And it's, not very much of it is sort of government led. I think,
No.
truthfully, the government was as surprised as anyone else by
Yes.
what was going on. It's mostly people watching TikTok and
Mhm.
YouTube for advice on how you snap together cheap Chinese solar panels. One of the things that it's made me realize that's so interesting about solar technology is how essentially low tech it is.
Yeah.
Building a solar panel is,
Mhm.
was a great feat,
Mhm.
and getting them better all the time and cheaper all the time is important work stuff. But once they're now commodity things. I mean, the Chinese can make an almost endless amount of them.
Yeah.
They have the capacity to produce twice, three times what we're putting up around the world.
Mhm.
Um, and once you've got them, they're exceptionally easy to put together. We put a plug-in solar unit at our house last week, and it took 10 minutes.
Mm.
It was like much easier than building something from IKEA, and
Yeah.
it just plugs straight into the wall, and you're ready to go. And that's extremely liberating. Uh, you know, it's not perfect, and there's going to be lots of growing pains. And
Of course.
we watch places in like Pakistan. I mean, one has to worry about the very poorest people in
Mhm.
Pakistan who
Yeah.
lack the money even to buy the cheap Chinese solar panels,
Yeah.
and now are stuck in a grid that's going to get more and more expensive because
Yes.
anyone who can is just dropping out of
Mhm.
participating. Um, so there are a lot, but I trust we will
Mhm.
figure out how to deal with those problems. Those are surmountable problems, unlike, say, climate change.
Absolutely.
And for the most part, it's just super liberating to be able to produce a lot of your own energy.
Hmm.
Uh, we're used to understanding this in a way when we think about food. Um, people dig plant vegetable gardens because I mean, they enjoy it and whatever, but also because there's something nice about being
Yeah.
able to raise a reasonable amount of your own food. It makes
Absolutely.
you feel independent.
Yeah.
Same with being able to produce your power supply.
Yeah.
So I think we've only begun to understand how much this is going to change the world. I think the deepest geopolitical change is just it's going to eventually and perhaps quite quickly devalue big deposits of coal and gas and oil. I mean, Trump went and invaded Venezuela.
Hmm.
He made no attempt to hide why. He didn't even say anything about
Yeah.
democracy
No.
or human rights. It was just, you have oil, we want it. But why do we want it? The oil companies know that they can't actually sell it.
Mm.
Uh, 60% of the cars sold in China last month had a plug. Where's the growth in demand for gasoline supposed to
Mm.
come from? I can't imagine anyone in Asia who has the opportunity choosing to buy an internal combustion engine at this point. Why not buy a cheap and highly capable electronic vehicle?
Mhm.
And then produce your own power.
Yeah.
Uh, Not worry.
I think in Pakistan's case, I would say, like, for example, most of the household would see $300 electricity bill during a summer where major 40% of the country cannot make $2 a day.
Yeah,
So they were like singing, the heavy cost of electricity, and they decided, you know what, if we keep relying on the government, they're not gonna do it other than sending us bills. So maybe depend on the sun, which is not gonna send us the
yeah.
bill.
Well, and it's not just, as you pointed out before, not just the cost. I don't think Americans understand this because the power rarely goes out in America,
Yeah,
only
that's
a
true.
hurricane or something.
Mhm.
But I've spent much of my life traveling around the developing world. The power goes out all the time.
All the time. Yes.
And
Yes.
that's why you have to have one
Yeah.
of these noisy and expensive generators if you're
Mhm.
going to run a business.
Yeah.
I read the other day that the total capacity of the generators in Nigeria is like 10 times the capacity of the electric grid. Everyone's got one, but they're
Yeah.
expensive, smelly,
Mhm.
noisy.
Yeah.
Their current they produce is variable and difficult to use. Now you're going to have a solar panel and it's going to connect to a battery,
Mhm.
and the battery is going to store enough energy so that, if you're connected to the grid and the power goes out, you're fine. And pretty quickly, people are going to understand that it's cheaper not even to be connected to the
Yeah.
grid.
And
It's a fascinating, fascinating change.
and I think Canada now, making deals with China to import more electric vehicles.
Yeah, wasn't that interesting?
Yeah,
That
that's
was
interesting because we are pushing them, like you rely on us, be thankful to us, to the US, or you're gonna be 51st state of ours, or things like that. So we're pushing them. So on the fossil fuel industry, and like they had a deep connection with politics in DC and other places. Do you think it's a big win, like what happened in Venezuela, and like how these companies, even
no.
though even though like it's gonna take, decades to build some sort of infrastructure for these, big oil companies, but like how,
Nobody wants to do this.
yeah.
They're trying to figure out how to tell Trump that they don't want to invest tens of billions of dollars because they know, I mean, if you invest that kind of money,
Mhm.
it demands the next 40 years to
Yeah.
make it pay off. I I don't think anyone, including the CEO of Exxon, can
Mhm.
imagine a world 40 years from now that needs a lot more oil. Just the opposite. They have to manage the predictable decline of their business now, um, because we've got an easier way to do all this stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I, the if it weren't for the fact of climate change and the fact that we have to do this very speedily, I'd be completely sanguine about all this. We're
Mhm.
going to go in the right direction because all this stuff's better. An EV is better than the car that you drive now. And an e-bike is probably the most important of these inventions. It's remarkable and it's going to be transformative for hundreds of millions, billions of people around the planet. The heat pump is better than the furnace in your basement. The induction cooktop is better than the open fire in your kitchen.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll get there. Our problem is that we're really up against the wall in terms of time when it comes to climate change. We have to get there so fast. And so that's why civil society, as well as economics, is going to have to play a crucial role here.
It's interesting. It's been 8 years I'm living in the US, and we see the world very differently where we come from. But did you ever like imagine in your life that there will be time in the US when our energy secretary going to Geneva and lecturing or mocking people like Germany or UK for clean energy or renewable energy, and like still saying that like no, the only way is fossil fuel, or like see what the administration is doing? Did you ever imagine as a American citizen that you will see days or years, something like that?
No, I'm obviously an old person. Um, I've been alive for a long time, more than a quarter of America's history. We're turned 250 this year, and I've been around for more than a quarter of it. And everything about the moment we're in right now is weird and unprecedented. But one of the weirdest parts is that America always, from Ben Franklin on, was all about being at the forefront of science and
Mhm.
technology. We were a country that innovated, invented, uh, and that drew the brightest people from around the world to help with that process of innovation and invention. And now to have, I mean, the Secretary of Commerce was in Davos yesterday telling the European heads of state to cut it out with the renewables and to burn coal instead. The head of the uh, European Common Market, Christine Lagarde, just got up and walked out of his talk. I mean, look, people started burning coal in Europe early in the 18th century. I mean, they know from coal,
Yeah.
and they know that it's dirty, expensive, destroying the climate, and not the basis for the future. America invented the solar cell, 1954, Bell Labs, Edison, New Jersey. America put up the world's first industrial wind turbine 30 miles south of me in the mountains of Vermont in 1943. We've taken these technologies made in America and handed them over to the country that's theoretically our chief adversary on the planet. In the last 1 year, America has ceded technological and economic primacy, probably for the rest of this century, to the Chinese. I don't think there's ever been a national sort of suicide pact quite like that.
And do you, so like in terms of the timing, if we look at the rate we are emitting CO2 in the atmosphere, and on the other hand, the rate of like renewable, where China is today, how much time you think if we start today, hypothetically, which we are not in the US, if we start today, how much time is going to take us to be there where China is today?
I mean, if we wanted to go fast, we could. California's cut the amount of natural gas that it uses to produce electricity by 40% in the last 2 years. So that's pretty fast,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to do it, we
Mhm.
we could move it at speed. Um, but for the moment, we don't want to do it because the fossil fuel industry controls our political life.
And that's from both sides, unfortunately. Maybe one side is more than the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, I think Biden did what he could. The Inflation Reduction Act was literally an effort to help the US
Mhm.
catch up to China, provided lots of money to to build EV plants and solar
Mhm.
plants and batteries and everything else. It was his and the Democrats' effort. They did a terrible job of explaining it to anyone,
Mhm.
so it was easy for the Republicans to pick off
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a both sides
Mm.
story here. I think it's very clear that the fossil fuel industry 20 or 25 years ago fully captured the Republican Party, and they've used it as their tool to block, delay the energy transition ever since.
So many people I have talked to, they argue that like maybe we are at our last resort. We have to do it. We have no other choice. But just for the sake of argument, if we say the things still continue in the similar fashion by 2050, what is our last resort? Like, do you think the solar engineering or something to do with that would work, or you think like it's gonna be too late for
But
anything?
we may find out, if we don't do the things that we can do, then at a certain point, we're going to have no choice. We'll break the glass and pull that lever, and I guess we'll try solar geoengineering, and then we'll find out. I'm afraid what the consequences are. I'm, I'm afraid, as usual, much of South Asia may be in the path here. One of the things that, as far as we can tell, will happen is that the monsoon will become erratic and unreliable.
Yeah.
which, as you know, would be a problem since a couple of billion people on
Hmm.
this planet more or less depend on the continued operation of the Asian monsoons
Yes.
in order to, have lunch and dinner. But maybe we'll have to try it. But it's so stupid when we have uh, a technological fix in hand that we could and should be employing. There's obviously going to have to be lots of other adaptation, even if we do everything right at this point. I mean, we're already got a lot of sea level rise baked in, and you know, you don't want to live next to the forest anymore because it's going to catch on fire.
Yeah.
And there probably are large areas beginning in South Asia where people simply aren't going to be able to live.
Hmm.
And, you know better than me, but those cities where the temperature now
Yes.
hits 125 degrees Fahrenheit,
Hmm.
I mean, at a certain point, I don't think that's really tenable. I mean,
No, it's not.
it can't
Yeah.
get much higher because the human body just can't cope with it.
No, it can.
You read the
Yeah.
first chapter of Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for of
Ministry
the
for the
Future.
future. Hmm.
Uh, that possibility of mass death from an Asian heat wave is, I'm afraid, very real.
Yeah. And air pollution too, like
Yeah.
at least 2 million people each year in India die due to
Well,
air
that's the,
pollution.
I mean, but that's the beauty of this renewable moment. I mean, I spent a lot of time in China, and
Hmm.
it used to be as terrible as Delhi is now.
Yes. Hmm.
But
Or Lahore, yeah.
none of those, there's not a Chinese city anymore on the list of the most polluted cities on Earth. The air's clean in
Mhm.
Beijing. Uh, you know, and not only is the air clean, the cities are noticeably quieter
Yeah.
because more than half the cars are electric.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of benefits you get from turning off internal combustion is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
one trusts that people will do it. And you see, even, I mean, I got to say, I don't think much of the government of India.
Mhm.
Modi is not my guy, and he's a creature of the coal industry.
Yeah.
Uh, the Adani group sort of helped put him in power, So, but these guys can read a spreadsheet,
Yeah.
and India is building out solar power fast now.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
so, and in Pakistan, I mean, Pakistan, which has not been noted for strong and reliable central governance in
Yeah.
recent years. People have just decided I think they're going to have to do this by themselves,
Yeah.
and
That's like one of the things people realize there in that region, that if they keep relying on the government, they're not gonna get anywhere. Um, so are you paying attention to the recent rising phenomena of, AI and the data centers and how much water they consume, but not only water, but how much air they're polluting in many of the parts of the country, talking from Grok, like XAI data
yeah.
centers, to Amazon, to Meta, and all that, or even
So
Microsoft.
I think there's a couple of things to be said. The first is it's not clear to me that this AI boom is for real and that we're
Mhm.
actually going to build anything like the number of data centers people are talking about,
Mm.
because these companies are having a hell of a hard time getting anybody to pay money to use
Yes,
their AI, because it's pretty trashy stuff, a lot of
it
it
is.
anyway,
It
you
is.
know. Um, but the thing that's scariest about it is, I think, the energy consumption.
Mhm.
Um, and if you're going to build if you buy into the notion that we need to very rapidly develop AI, so I guess the theory is so that we get AI before China. Um,
Mhm.
if you really buy into that, then the only way to do this really is to build a lot of renewable energy because that's what goes up quickly. Or you can do what Elon Musk did, which was go basically rent a bunch of jet engines or
Mhm.
diesel engines, stick them around temporary things, stick them around your plant, turn them on and pollute a black neighborhood uh,
Yes.
without enough political power to stop you.
Yeah, in Memphis, near Memphis, it's
Yeah,
happening. Mhm.
yeah. Uh, I mean, look. for my money, the richest man in the world gives us every day a list of things not to do and
Mhm.
ways not to be. It's just our poor luck that the richest man in the world is a racist, anti-environmental nut job. Um, but in the larger sense, if we're going to do this, we should be leveraging it to build renewable energy left and right, not just build renewable energy. There was a really interesting study from the people at Rewiring America saying that in place after place around the country, the cheapest way to free up the electricity for a new data center, say you're Microsoft and you want to build a data center,
Mhm.
what you should do, one of the places you should start is go around the state, finding everybody who has like electric resistance heating, the
Mhm.
really antiquated baseboard, expensive electric heating, and hand them a heat pump.
Mhm.
Say, here's a free heat pump, plug it in, and it's going to use so much less electricity that it will save the people in the house lots and lots of money, and it'll free up the power that you need to run your data center.
Mhm.
So it's not as if we couldn't solve these things creatively, but under Trump, they're just using them as an excuse to try and build more gas-fired power.
Because they know they can get away with whatever the regulations they can, including all of them, not just, Microsoft or Google or Amazon, but like all of them. Um, and do you have, when you have a conversation, I mean, you are a well-known person, when you have a conversations with these politicians or you meet with them, I know you had a podcast with Bernie Sanders, but like, I mean, he's one of the good ones, few of the good ones. So when you have a conversation with policymakers, do they not realize this, like the health costs, the benefits?
Often they don't realize it very much. You remember, if you're a politician, the only thing you really have to know about is how to get elected. So that's what
Mhm.
they're very skilled in. And then they know a little bit about a lot of things,
Yeah.
but their knowledge tends to be out of date and their talking points are from 10 years ago and things. So it takes a while to bring them up to speed. That's why it's useful when there are things that are simple enough that it really gets through to people and to
Mhm.
politicians. So one thing I've been pointing out a lot this year is that Australia, which is a country like the US, I
Yeah.
mean, same latitude, same educational level, same everything,
Yeah.
um, they built so many solar panels that beginning in June, everybody in Australia is going to get 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon. Because why not? There's
Right.
just
Yeah.
an endless amount of power flowing into the system. So, I mean, I know exactly what will happen.
Mhm.
Everyone in Australia will have timers on their dishwasher and their washing machine. They'll have timer on their
Yeah.
EV charging equipment, and they'll go buy a storage battery,
Mhm.
which in fact the government is helping them buy, but which are getting cheaper all the time. And they'll use that to store power every afternoon so they can run their house for free at night.
Yeah.
And and this is the kind of thing you don't have to understand a thing about uh, how utilities work or whatever to understand that this is a good thing. If I were running for Congress, that's a story I'd be telling over and over and over again.
Yeah, but the people who are running for Congress, they're not telling this story, unfortunately. They're telling still the other stories.
I hope they will. I
Yeah.
just wrote a column. I write a newsletter.
Mhm.
Mostly, I think, because it's free, has become the biggest climate and environment newsletter there is. And the one last week was just, here, I've written a speech for you for congressional candidate. Take it and use it. You know,
Yeah.
uh, here's how to argue this, so
Yeah.
it makes sense to people. And I think a lot of them will. There's an increasing number of champions of clean energy out there. Um, and again, if we didn't have this unrelenting time pressure from climate change, I'd be feeling good about things.
And looking at right now, the emission rate or everything else, other than geopolitics, because that's another variable which is kind of tricky to predict, because like we never predicted like this is going to happen, what is
Hmm.
happening now in the US,
Yeah,
and we don't know what's going to happen in 2028. So one these climate modeling does not feed the geopolitics variable into that
Yep.
to see, the future warming.
Yep.
Do you think like the way we're seeing things right now, the Greenland and Venezuela and all that, it's kind of somehow distraction and moving away from the real climate catastrophe we are seeing in the future, and that might lead us into kind of very bad situation, like looking at three
Definitely.
degrees C or something.
Definitely. The only good news is remember that at this point, the US is only about 11% of global emissions.
Hmm.
So let's assume for the moment that the US stays in this bad place and does bad things one after another. Yeah, it'll make it harder. It'll certainly mean that, I mean, America's CO2 emissions are now rising.
Hmm.
Um, but I, I think every time we do something like seize Venezuela, it persuades more other countries to try and move away from
Hmm.
fossil fuel. So this cuts both ways. The
Hmm.
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us that to stay on anything like a Paris pathway, we need to cut emissions in half by 2030, which is now only 3 years and
Yeah.
11 months away. So that's a huge job. And the US will make it harder,
Mm.
but it will also weirdly make it easier, I think. Do you
Yeah.
know that expression, like the dog that catches the car?
Hmm.
Dogs are always chasing cars
Yeah.
and looking at them. Well, I mean, what does a dog do if it chases a car and catches it? It has no idea what to do.
No.
I think the oil industry is kind of in that position now. They've gotten everything they've asked for out of
Yeah.
the Trump administration.
Hmm.
And so now he's given them Venezuela,
Yeah.
and what do they do with it? They
Yeah.
don't want to invest $100 billion trying to, pump oil for which there's no market. Um, I think they've got a losing hand. The only question is how long they can, keep their supply of chips to keep playing.
Do you see any in the near future we are heading toward 3C?
I think we're on a track towards 3C at the moment, and I think that we have to do everything we possibly can do to start shaving tenths of a degree off that. And it's just the tragic reality of the world we live in. And look, I mean, it's there are days when I feel a very personal failure here. I understood this before almost anybody in the world. I wrote the first book about what we now call climate change. I've built the first organizations, 350.org, to take it on, and we were unable to prevent it. The fossil fuel industry was too strong. We've done something to limit it and to build response, but not enough. If the planet goes to 3 degrees Celsius, it wouldn't surprise me. And I think more dangerous than that
Mm.
is the fact that we're really seeing climate impacts happen at lower temperature levels than we would have thought
Mm.
a couple of decades ago. The the Antarctic seems to be becoming unhinged more quickly than we thought it would. The great currents of the Atlantic, the
Mm.
Gulf Stream and things, seem to be more vulnerable than we understood. And the way that the jet stream has begun to wave and bend and get stuck is not something that we were focused on in the 1980s. We didn't understand that that most basic of physical phenomenon was vulnerable in quite the way it turns out to be.
And even coral reefs, we saw the reports recently making the headlines, and I think England, for example, having national emergency briefing or something where they have, hosted bunch of scientists to talk about different dimensions like national security to agriculture to food, and how these systems can collapse if we continue, down this path. But in the US, unfortunately, that's not happening. But what is something, I know what is something which keep you good night's sleep, but what is something which keep you up at night, thinking about these things?
All the things we've been discussing, scare the hell out of me. They're very real, and it's possible that we've just waited too late to respond.
Mm,
Once these physical systems start, the momentum, especially for things like ice melt, is just enormous. I mean, we know that most of the planet's 95% or so of the excess heat trapped by the carbon that we've poured into the atmosphere gets at least temporarily stuck in the oceans.
mm,
Thank God, because if the oceans weren't soaking up that excess heat, the air temperature on the planet would average about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. But that huge increase in heat content in the ocean only stays there so long. Um, and so there's a lot of extra energy in this system now, and it's scary to watch. That's why I don't think there's any great outcome here, but I think that there are definitely better and worse outcomes.
mm,
And an outcome where we've shaved some percentage of the eventual heat out by putting up a lot of solar panels and wind turbines, and at the same time made people who now have access to sun and wind power more independent, more capable of coping with emergencies and things. I think at the moment that's about the best we can hope for.
And what is one thing I would ask you as a last question is that what is something you still believe that young people, older people, people who care about the planetary health, people who care about this planet, the only planet so far we know in the solar system that has a life, what do you want them to continue do to
The
make a meaningful
important thing,
change?
the important thing for individuals to do always is to be a little less individual
Mm,
and join together with others in movements that are large enough to have some hope of changing this. Look, big nonviolent social movements
mm,
are a relatively new phenomenon on this planet. They're a 20th century phenomenon, and they were developed more in South Asia than any place on planet Earth.
mm,
We all know about Gandhi, but
mm,
my greatest of all heroes was a guy named Badshah Khan, Ghaffar Abdul Khan from the
mm.
Pathan region up there,
Yes,
in
yes.
what we now, I guess, would call Pakistan.
Mm,
Um, he was Gandhi's great associate, the frontier Gandhi, they called
mm,
him. And he built a nonviolent army called the
mm.
Kudai Khitmat Gar. It was the
Yes.
most
Yes.
effective example of nonviolence in action that the world has ever seen. That's what we need, and we need it more all the time, as Donald Trump is making clear. I
Yeah.
mean, look, those were brave people, and a lot of them died standing up to the British,
Yeah.
especially in the frontier provinces where there weren't a lot of reporters to watch what was going on and
Yeah.
things. But
There's a remote areas in the mountains, so people don't have access to the information, or reporters don't go there either.
but they drove the British out, you
Yeah,
know.
they did.
I mean, and for his pains, Ghaffar Abdul Khan,
Mhm.
Pakistanis quickly stuck him in prison.
Yes.
He scared them too. So
Yeah.
I'm afraid that's some of what it takes.
Mhm.
But he's my great inspiration in many ways. And if people want to know more about him, there's actually a wonderful book called "A Man to Match His Mountains" by a Indian writer named Eshwaran, Easwaran. Um, I think we need human solidarity, big
Yeah,
movements that push in the right direction, because otherwise the billionaires are going to decide what happens, and they're going to
absolutely.
decide what's good for them. And, you know, what does it tell you that their biggest hope in the world is to fly away to Mars?
Mhm. Yeah,
That
I
should
mean,
be a clue about how much to trust them.
yeah, absolutely. Have you been to Pakistan?
I have, and I'm eager to go back. Uh, uh, and I'd love someday to be able to get up there uh, into that area along the border with Afghanistan
Mhm.
and just trace the history of this guy who is my great
Yeah.
hero. Yeah.
Ghaffar Abdul Khan and Bacha Khan, those people. Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill. It was pleasure talking to you. Thank you so
Mohammed,
much
what
for
a
your time
pleasure,
and
man.
the
Many
work
thanks
as
for all
well.
your good work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take
Thank
care.
you.